Welcome to East London. My name is Al-Makhadhi from AJ+. Yesterday, the UK voted in a historic referendum to leave the European Union and start a process called Brexit. We're here in Whitechapel in East London, a largely Bangladeshi mixed community, a heavily migrant-based community, where hundreds of people are marching today to support refugees and migrants' rights. The campaign to leave the European Union was heavily anti-immigrant. It was based on the idea that Britain's borders needed to be controlled better, that immigration needed to be controlled better, and so these people have gathered here in Whitechapel, marching from East London into the City of London, the heart of the financial district, to tell Britain, to tell London, to tell the world that refugees and migrants are welcome in this city. London is a very special case because although around 52% of the UK voted for Brexit, voted to leave the European Union, London actually voted against that. London voted 60% to stay in the European Union. So it is a massive contrast. There is a lot of anger here, a lot of surprise, a lot of fear about what's going to happen next. So it is very loud, very noisy at this demonstration. We're going to try to grab a couple of people who've decided to march here, and we're going to ask them some questions. So if you have got any questions, please do pass them on to us, write them in the comments, and we will try to get to them as soon as possible. So I can see Kelly saying that the Brexit vote is stained by the same xenophobia that we're seeing in the US. This bigotry must always be rejected. And I think that a lot of people would see it that way. A lot of people do see the Brexit vote as xenophobic, as an anti-migrant vote. And of course, a lot of people were voting on a lot of different reasons. We're voting on a lack of control. We're voting for economic reasons. It is very noisy here. I apologise for the noise. But undoubtedly, one of those reasons for voting was because of the fear of migrants and the fear of immigration and the scapegoating of immigration. So what we're going to do is talk to one of the protesters here. Hi, can I grab you for a second? You're live on AJ+. Please. He doesn't want to speak. We'll talk to someone. We'll talk to someone in a second. Away from the heart of the protest. So a lot of people are saying, why do some of the protesters have balaclavas on? There is a lot of fear among activists and protesters in the UK that police film these protests and film the demonstrations to gather evidence to press criminal charges later if things turn violent. And so a lot of protesters, a lot of die-hard protesters who have taken part in a lot of these marches wear balaclavas for that reason, to prevent them, to help stop the police gathering those kind of evidence. Okay. We're going to try to get a speaker right now. Can I grab you guys really quickly? You're live on AJ+. Oh, okay. These people don't want to speak either. We will find someone who's willing to speak very soon. So around 3 million non-British EU migrants live in the UK, and there is a fear now that when Britain leaves the EU, because this is a decision to leave the EU, that those people will be at risk, that those people will face difficulties and may not be allowed to stay in the UK. So there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of anger about that as well. So there are a lot of different things going on here.
Stop deportation! Stop deportation! Stop deportation! Stop deportation! Stop deportation!
Okay, while the protest continues here, I'm going to answer a few of your questions. So Dennis is asking, why does it mean the UK out of the EU means no immigration? Who said the UK will no longer allow immigrants? Well, one of the reasons that a lot of people voted for Brexit and voted to leave the European Union was because people are worried about migration from other parts of the European Union. That people are worried that there are no limits, that the UK can't limit the number of people entering the UK from other parts of the European Union, and the only way to control that and to limit people coming into the UK would be to leave the European Union. That's one of the reasons that people were voting yesterday in support of Brexit. Another one of the protest marches that you can hear here is "No borders, no nations, stop deportations," and that's another aspect of the anger that's going on here. That this is a pro-refugee demonstration, and one of the reasons that people are protesting here, just to remind you, we're in East London, marching across East London after the Brexit vote with people who are angry that Britain has voted to leave the European Union, but also with people who are worried about the future of migrants and immigration in the UK. And one of those aspects is that people are worried that refugees and migrants are being deported too easily, that they are being scapegoated for Britain's economic problems, and that there are fast-track deportation methods to kick people out of the country who claim asylum. And sometimes those people are removed from the country, these people would believe, unfairly. Okay, keep sending your questions in. I will try to get to as many questions as I can. Carmel is asking, how many people are there? Well, there are hundreds that I can see right here, possibly stretching all the way back down this road. Possibly as many as 1,000 people marching across East London. They are marching from Whitechapel, a heavily Bangladeshi area, an area that has been heavily migrant and has been built by migrants over the course of the last half century, and before that even. It was a heavily Jewish area. It's always been a very mixed area, very symbolic of the multiculturalism of London. And we're marching with these people from East London, from Whitechapel, into the City of London, up to the Shard, the tallest building in the UK. Manuel is asking, do you think refugees create a serious economic burden on the UK? Well, I think that you have to look at the numbers, and the number of refugees who are resettled in the UK is tiny. It is the UN has said that Britain has to do more. The European Union has tried to get Britain to do more in terms of its burden of taking in refugees. A few hundred Syrian refugees have been let into the UK so far. David Cameron, the Prime Minister, who announced his resignation this morning, said that he would let in thousands more, but that is still yet to happen. So now the march that's going on, the demonstration chant that's going on right now is migrants in, Tories out. Of course, it was the Tories, the Conservative Party, that called this referendum and that pushed for the Brexit vote, even though David Cameron was campaigning to stay in the European Union. A lot of his party have been pushing for 20 years to get out of the European Union, and they're a large part of the reason why Britain has left the European Union, or has announced that it will leave the European Union.
voice? Who are you? A bunch of hipsters.
We take
They
care
have
of our
no
own.
voice. No voice. And they voted with their hearts. And they will pay the price if they have to. What do you mean, oh my God? What? Do you think this is together in our city? The world is shocked, appalled.
Because there's a woman here who's very angry that this protest is happening. We'll try to grab her and see what she says.
They voted. They live it.
Can I ask you really quickly? Why are you're live on AJ Plus? Why are you unhappy?
I'm what?
Live on AJ Plus on
Okay.
Facebook. Why are you unhappy that the protest is happening? What do you think? About
I'm unhappy that this is going on my street in my capital after a democratic referendum. That's wrong. What are you doing? The working man spoke. There's not 17 million working class and privileged people in this country, and they had no voice. And this lot, or I don't know about this, but certainly they've been pushed to an untenable position, and the only voice they've got has been to put a bloody cross in a box. Live with it. They do every day. Depressed wages, doctors' queues, everything else, and a bit of sovereignty. You need to get to grips with your sovereignty. As I think a very simple woman of about 80 on Question Time said, which, it says it all. Sorry, I'm ashamed that this is going on.
Thank you very much for
The
your time.
world is looking at this and saying we can't live with a democratic vote. A man, with one cross vote, when most general elections depend on where you live.
Do you think Britain will? Do you think Britain will live to regret this decision?
Pardon?
Do you think Britain will live to regret this decision?
Never. No, absolutely not. This is one of the children I look after. I've got 4 grandchildren. No, and I've got no. This is giving a future. You must understand, we're all serfs now. We're all peasants now in Europe. It's just a great big takeover by global industries.
Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Well, that's the alternative view, that Europe is this great super state supporting the big multinationals, and of course, the last time that Britain had a referendum on EU membership was in the 1970s, and it was the left wing, it was the Labour Party, it was left-wing activists that were campaigning to leave the European Union, and it was the right wing, the Conservative Party, that took the UK into the European Union. So really things have changed so dramatically over the last 40 years that we've been a member of the EU. Caroline Jones is saying, don't worry, not all Brexiters are opposed to migrants. We're anti-corruption, anti-bankers and pro-peace. And I think that's something that a lot of people here, a lot of Londoners wouldn't understand, wouldn't accept. The country's really been divided. It's been split along political lines, right down the middle, with London, Scotland, Northern Ireland voting to remain in the European Union, and the rest of the UK voting against. So things are really divided. The country is completely polarised right now. Okay, just to give you a bit more background about what's going on, my name is Al-Makhadhi, I'm from AJ Plus, and we are live at an anti-Brexit, pro-migrant, pro-refugee, pro-immigrant demonstration that is crossing London 24 hours after the historic vote to leave the European Union. The result was announced in the early hours of this morning, really shocking people, because it was assumed that the Remain campaign would just about win. I'm going to answer a few of your questions. Aziza is saying, okay, so it's a democratic vote, so people no longer have the right to express themselves. Talking about the woman we just spoke to. Well, no, I think there is a feeling that a lot of people are angry that the country's been split down the middle. So I'm going to talk to a couple of people who are here at the protests. Hello, you're live on AJ Plus. If you could just tell us what your names are.
I'm Arjun.
Hi, Arjun.
I'm Fraser.
Hi, Fraser and Arjun. Tell me why you're here at this demonstration.
We're here to defend migrants who are under attack. We had a result that has resulted in a poisonous atmosphere in society, but this is something that's been the making of the entire referendum from both sides. This wasn't our referendum. Nothing good was ever going to come out of it. The overwhelming feeling that many people have, rightfully, is hopelessness and powerlessness, and this is us taking it back and reversing that.
What do you think that this protest can do? What do you think it can change? Is it going to change anything?
Individually, no. But what it is here to do, this is the day after, the day of the results of the referendum, the day after the referendum, and what we're here to do is build something. The organisation of this event has been called by a broad group of grassroots movements and grassroots groups who are all unifying, people who had different opinions on the referendum, different ways of voting, but we are all broadly in alliance with immigrants and with migrants and with refugees, and we are against the poisonous racism that is corrupted this entire debate. And
specifically, what are they calling for? What are the demands of this protest? Because
we're trying to change the conversation. Like the conversation for the last year or so, even before the referendum, has been against migrants, against immigrants, like people's working class situation that people situation that working class people find themselves in. Are the effects of austerity, the effects of harsh cuts onto our services, the effects of what's happening on the NHS and stuff. All of our media and our government and even opposition are fighting that, are polluting that argument with anti-immigrant rhetoric. They're blaming the migrants rather than the bosses. It's not the boss's fault for paying a EU migrant a lower wage. It's the migrant's fault for taking a lower wage, and that's a wrong fucking conclusion to make.
Do you think that this is that this result was an anti-establishment British establishment, and that this wasn't the result that they expected?
The phrase has gone. She didn't really want to talk. I think part of that's true. I think what from the left you mean? So what, people didn't want to leave?
Yeah, I mean, do you think that a lot of people on the left voted? It was we kept hearing that Jeremy Corbyn was maybe not as active and pro-Remain as he could have been, and that a lot of people on the left didn't vote in large numbers to remain in the EU.
I don't think it was a thing of being Remain or leave. I think of not being strong on a Remain vote. I think it was the arguments that he brought forward. His party, even his shadow cabinet, capitulated to the anti-immigrant rhetoric. They saw the direction that the argument was going, and then Jeremy Corbyn didn't really, to be honest, to his credit, but even John McDonnell, his shadow chancellor, said we have to make so we have to limit freedom of movement and things like that. People brought this shit about, and we're here on a No Borders platform, and we're here to defend all immigrants and all migrants and all refugees. It's not about whether you voted Remain or Leave. Like, I abstained in the vote. I didn't vote Remain. I didn't vote Leave.
Why didn't you vote?
I just spoiled my ballot. I didn't. But I did that because I reject this whole referendum. I disagree profoundly with the EU for reasons of the devastation it's caused across Europe, across Southern Europe in particular. In enabling and legitimising of far-right movements to break out across Europe. You look at France, you look at Greece, you look at what's happening here. That is partly the result and the blame of the EU. And my family are non-EU migrants. I know what the EU does to non-EU migrants, and most of your viewers at home probably know that as well.
Thank you so much, Arjan. Good to
Cheers.
speak to you. Fraser, can I speak to you really quickly?
I'm going to say very similarly to
That's
Arjun, I
fine.
think.
You can say exactly the same if you
Okay.
want. What did you vote yesterday?
I did vote, and I actually did vote to remain, and it was a last-minute decision. I have to say, felt really resentful being put in the position actually of the referendum in the first place,
Yeah.
because I didn't feel. The referendum was called to placate certain members of the Tory party and UKIP. It wasn't a popular call to have a referendum over the question of EU membership. And so I felt quite conflicted, as I think Arjun's described, because I felt that the EU as an institution is imposing austerity across the European member countries. It allows thousands of non-EU migrants to drown in the Mediterranean, and I felt really resentful to have to kind of give support to that institution. But on the other hand, I felt I predicted what would feel this morning when you woke up and there was a majority of the country had said. The whole referendum was argued around migration, and I think for a lot of people, that 52%, just less than 52% of people don't want migrants. And although it isn't as clear as that, and it wasn't a vote solely on migration. Actually, a lot of people had different reasons to reject the EU. That just generally disenfranchised people with establishment. But I think I couldn't allow Boris and Farage another vote, so in my resented state I voted to remain. But I think the demo today is something positive to come from people feeling like the country is full of people who hate migrants, and I think the main point of the demonstration has to be saying there is opposition to the argument around immigration, which hasn't been in the mainstream. Even the left and even the Labour Party until recently were saying, well, of course we do need some controls on migration, we do need tighter controls. So it became so shifted to the right that I think it's important that people have basically had a wake-up call around how far the right have won the argument around immigration, and that people are going to start become more active in opposing that narrative.
Do you think anything will change with that narrative? Do you think that now, once the UK does leave the EU, if things don't change, if there isn't an improvement in people's living standards, in their ability to get jobs, in housing, in schools, do you think people will realise that maybe migration wasn't to blame, migration wasn't the answer, and that there will be a change in that narrative?
Well, I think that's not going to be happening. Those things aren't going to happen if they're not fought for. And so I think part of the problem, of course, if there wasn't if there wasn't job cuts, if there wasn't if they weren't slicing speeches and privatising the NHS, then people might have less impetus to be fooled by the arguments around migration. But there also needs, in a time of austerity, there needs to be an alternative discourse saying actually we don't need austerity, and so it's not a question of cutting migration, or that question isn't even posed in the first place. So I think unless people organise and start to fight seriously for a different narrative around why you don't have a job, not because a migrant stole it, but because the Tories have made horrendous cuts, then you're going to be in the same situation.
Yeah. We've got a few questions coming in from our audience. Michael Loras is asking, why are migrants important to the UK and to its future?
Well, I don't believe in borders, so I don't see why. The question for me is not really a question of why are they important. It's like, on what grounds, by right of being born somewhere, do you have to kind of protect that land? It's absurd. But obviously, I work in the NHS, and if we didn't have NHS workers, we wouldn't have an NHS. So for our healthcare system to function on a basic level, we have to have migrants. We aren't training enough nurses. We aren't. I think it's beyond the question of what can migrants give. It's like, on what grounds do we have to exclude anyone? So I think,
Okay. Fraser, thank you so much for your time. Good to speak to you. So we're going to take a few more questions. Let me briefly explain to you again where we are and what's going on. It's very, very noisy here. This is a pro-migrant, pro-immigration protest following the Brexit vote. We're marching across London. There's a London taxi stuck in the street right here. Traffic has been stopped across a huge swathe of London as probably thousands of people march across London from East London, from Whitechapel, a heavily Bangladeshi area, across into the City of London, which is where we're approaching right now, to show their support for migration, for immigrants, because really this EU referendum campaign has been so heavily focused on immigration, the idea of controlling borders, re-controlling borders, being able to impose limits on the number of immigrants coming in and choosing who can come in, imposing quality controls, if you like, a kind of point system to stop people freely entering the UK. Because at the moment, as a member of the European Union, anyone from other parts of the European Union has the right to work and live in the UK without applying for any kind of immigration system. So let's take a few of your questions here. If you've got any questions, if you've got anything you want to ask about the protest, about the EU vote that took place yesterday, feel free to send those in. We have Christina saying migration is important because as Europe and the UK has a wide and ageing generation and a small young generation to support the system. So we'll show you a few more scenes from this demonstration here in East London. Okay, so a few more questions coming in. Al says, what is this nonsense? Don't go people on the street against the war, complaining about immigrants, take some refugees and then speak up again maybe. Well, the problem is that the UK hasn't really taken many refugees or immigrants. It hasn't resettled many refugees who have claimed asylum and have been granted asylum and have been processed by the UN. And that's one of the problems, and that's one of the things that people are calling for here. Deso is saying the British were among the first illegal immigrants in the world. Wherever they've been outside of Europe, they've been there illegally. Now they want to cry. Well, it's true that the UK did colonise huge chunks of the world for centuries, and that's one of the reasons that the UK is now such a multicultural place. London is one of the most multicultural cities in the world. We've come from Whitechapel, which is one of the Bangladeshi areas of London, and London was one of the three parts of the UK to vote to stay in the European Union. So these people here represent the majority of Londoners. They represent a group of people, 60% of Londoners, who voted to stay in the European Union and are being pulled out of the EU against their wishes, the wishes of the rest of the UK. Roida is saying, do you think it's going to change the decision? Please say yes. We're in for a period of massive political uncertainty right now. David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, announced his resignation this morning. It looks like we'll have a new Prime Minister within the next 3 months. We don't know where this is going to lead us. It'll be surprising if the UK doesn't leave the European Union, but nothing's out of the question. And there are ways of not completely leaving the European Union, of getting some kind of free trade agreement without leaving completely. D. Bills Woolhurst is saying, as a European who lived in the UK for more than 10 years but is now back in Paris, can I still come back to work, and would I need a work permit of any kind? Well, at the moment, yeah, you can come back to the UK freely and work and live, and that will be the case probably for at least the next 2 years, because the UK is still a member of the European Union. When the UK does eventually leave, if it does leave, as the referendum has demanded, a work permit may be required for European citizens. There may be exceptions for certain categories of workers, for certain residents of certain countries even. There may be a deal with Western European countries. We don't know that at the moment. It's too early to say. What other questions have we got? Lavon is asking, how has this change affected the status of the nationality of people? Well, if you mean European migrants, EU citizens living in the UK, non-UK EU citizens, so in other words, citizens of other European countries who live here, how has it changed their status? It hasn't yet. There are about 3 million of them, 3 million out of a population of more than 60 million in the UK are residents of other EU states. And their status won't immediately change. There have been attempts to reassure them that they're not going to be immediately deported. Claire is asking or saying something very interesting. What's your problem? London doesn't represent the whole of the UK. You're absolutely right, it doesn't. London is a bubble in many ways. It is very different to the rest of the UK. It's resented by some people outside of London because of how dominant the city is, of how much it controls in terms of finance, in terms of politics. A lot of people here in London are seen as the elite that control things and don't understand or care about the rest of the UK. And the city voted very differently to the rest of the UK. 60% in support of Remain yesterday, compared to 48% in support of Remain across the whole of the rest of the UK. Luke Smith is saying, love how none of them even look English. Well, if you mean that they're not white, a lot of people here are white, but London is a multicultural city and a lot of people born here are not white. And if you mean look English by the colour of their skin, well, yeah, you're absolutely right. A lot of Londoners don't look English. Pop Zimmerman saying, migrants' rights, what rights? That's another very good question. We're going past the Gherkin here. This is one of the symbolic buildings of London, 30 St Mary Axe, known as the Gherkin, a symbol of the city of London, the financial district of London. So if you've got any more questions about what's going on here, feel free to ask them. We're just about to approach the heart of the city of London. And what's going on here is a pro-migrant, pro-refugee demonstration a day after the UK voted to leave the European Union. And why is it happening? Why is it happening here and why is it happening now? It's happening because the campaign was so vitriolic and anti-immigrant and talked about closing borders. Harris is asking, does this mean that many Brits now migrate to mainland EU and become immigrants there? Well, interestingly, a lot of there's been a huge surge in Google searches for how to get an Irish passport. It's apparently quite easy for British citizens born to Irish parents or to Irish grandparents to apply for an Irish passport. Of course, Ireland will remain a member of the European Union. It's one of the 28 EU member states, and anyone applying for an Irish passport will automatically become an EU citizen, with all of those rights and privileges that EU citizenship gives you, which is the right to live and work and freely enter and move across the European Union, which are rights that people here may soon lose as we leave the European Union. Okay, we are at a demonstration in support of refugees and migrants, live on AJ+. We're going to leave it here from the City of London, the heart of the financial district, a day after the UK historically voted to leave the European Union. 52% voted to leave the European Union after a really, really brutal, vitriolic campaign that was quite heavily anti-immigrant and talked about closing borders. The UK's made its decision. London voted the other way, voted to stay in the European Union, and these people are protesting in support of migrants and refugees and against that referendum decision. I'm Al-Makhadhi, live in London on Facebook for AJ+. Thank you.